Yes. Up next, we have the internationally recognized collaboration expert, Christian Buckley, talking about finding and developing your digital workplace champions. So, without further ado, Christian, thank you for being here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me share that. And let me also turn off my video. You don't need to see my face while I'm talking through this. There we go. Yeah, thanks. This is actually one of my favorite topics. I've given a variation of this on 3 different continents as a keynote presentation, but it's a topic that I care a lot about. Just very quickly for those, if you don't know some of my background, so I've been in the well, we'll find out next week if I'm a 9-time MVP, but I was originally a SharePoint MVP. But in the Microsoft community since 2005, I was at Microsoft for 3.5 years. I was part of the team that built the what is now Office 365. It was MMS, or Microsoft Managed Services, which became BPOS, or Business Productivity Online Services, and then got rebranded as Office 365. But I've been around collaboration technology the majority of my career, going back into the late 90s. Have a company called Collab Talk. I provide fractional CMO services. I work almost entirely with ISVs within the Microsoft ecosystem. And of course, my passion is collaboration and productivity. You've got my contact information there. This talk, when I say it's one of my favorites, I'm going to tell some stories here. So I'm going to share 3 stories. So you get to enjoy some of my triumphs and my pains. And then I'm going to talk about the 4 ingredients for success around this idea of digital workplace champions. And from that, we can have a kind of a discussion of, where do I go from here? What do I do? How do I make this my own? How do I identify these people within my organization? And it really comes down to a conversation around managing change management in an organization. So let me start off with this story, which is not about the workplace. It's a personal story that I walk home. And I want to preface this by saying that every word of it is true. Son, who this is about, this is picture that you see in the background. This is my former town. Lived in for 12 years, just about 10 miles east of Redmond, of Microsoft campus. So this little town of Duval, Washington, we lived in this place, loved this house, had all 4 kids go attend high school in this little town. And we were in a neighborhood right up at the top. The whole town is on this hill. We've got the river kind of wrapping around half the town down at the bottom, down in the valley. And the high school is at the top of the hill. And our neighborhood kind of was adjoined to the high school property. So to get from, like, our kids would generally walk to and from school. We'd pick them up when we were available, but the kids were fairly self-sufficient. If they wanted to walk down to the grocery store, it was a mile and a half down the hill, then walk back. Walking to school was not that big of a deal. Well, I'm working from home, as I've been for the last more than a decade now, and I get a phone call early afternoon. I'm home alone, and get a phone call from my son, and he's like, "Dad," he's kind of out of breath. He says, "Dad, I need you to come get me." And just kind of the tone of it, just like I turned down the music, it's coming out of my speakers, and it's like, "What's going on? Where are you?" He says, "I'm up at the school." I'm like, "Okay, yeah." And I'm like, as I'm talking to him, I'm looking for my car keys in the desk. And he says, "Yeah, I really need to ride home right now." Is like, something going wrong, or you're not able to walk home? He's like, "No, I'm just really tired." And I kind of paused, and I said, "You're tired." It's like, "Preston, just walk home." It's like, "No, Dad, I can't." He says, "Well, what have you been doing?" He says, "Well, I after school sports." I'm like, "What sport?" "Well, cross country." I said, "So you were out running?" He's like, "Yes." I said, "Walk home. I'm not going to come pick you up." I said, "It's literally downhill, walk home. And so we went back and forth. Now, Dad, I'm really tired. My legs are sore and I can't do that. Argued with me. I said, fine. So I was a bit frustrated. So I grabbed my car keys and I shut down. I was in the middle of working on some documentation and shut everything down and drove up the 3 minutes that it takes to drive there. Of course, very quickly, a plan was formulated. And so you have to get a picture of this. So it was a nice summer day, beautiful day, great day for a walk home. I had all of the windows rolled down in the car, the sunroof open. I had Duran Duran blasting as loud as my CD would play.
Okay, there are some hiccups here with the audio, or is it just me? Annie, are you hearing this okay?
Yeah, we have a little robotics going on there.
Yeah, it's on and off. It's not impossible. Let's try to just continue and see how it goes. Overall, it's been good. Let's just continue trying. Sorry.
So we've got Duran Duran blaring on the stereo, and I'm driving to the entrance of the high school, and it's one of those where it has kind of a long driveway down. So I roll in as I pull around the corner. And I see that there are kids that are getting out of the sports teams, the football team, the other runners that are there. There's some teachers, some faculty that are kind of lounging around, and I see him sitting on a bench down at the end of this little drive right in front of the school, and I immediately start honking my horn, not just little meep meep. I mean holding it down. And then I start screaming out the window, Preston, Preston. And I start waving because I'm driving like 10 miles an hour. So very slow intentionally, screaming. It's like, Preston, it's me, it's Dad. And as I get closer, of course, everyone is now watching me. And I pull up right in front of them, continuing to repeatedly honk the horn. And I'm waving out of the sunroof and I'm yelling, Preston, it's Dad. I love you. I love my son, Preston Buckley. I love my son. This is my son. I'm like, get in. I'm here to pick you up. And I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. And you have teachers coming out of the front of the high school to see what the commotion is. And of course, kids are laughing now. And so as he sits there, his head droops down and he shakes his head. And as he gets up, I can see he's suppressing a smile, but he gets in. And of course, then I'm still yelling. The music is still loud. I'm honking the horn. I give him hugs. As I drive away, I'm pointing, this is Preston. This is my son. I love my son. And so as we drive out, I'm honking still and yelling and just making as much noise as possible as we leave the front of the school and drive away. And there's of course trees that block it, but I had to let the music fade for the people that were outside so they could appreciate this. There's one stop sign between the high school and in our home as I almost coast downhill to our house. As we roll to the stop sign, and I turn the music down, and the only words he said to me that afternoon, he says, "Well played, Dad." I shared that story in a presentation in Auckland, New Zealand, a couple years back, and I was live streaming it, and I asked my son I said, "Hey, I'm going to be presenting. Do you want to watch the live stream?" And apparently he did tune into the beginning of that story and then disconnected. He's like, yeah, Dad, I heard enough. I didn't need to stay involved with that. So what does this have to do with change? What can we learn from the change process with this encounter with my son? And for the rest of the story there, I should say is the very next day. I kid you not, the next day, same time of day, he gives me a call. Of course, I've got caller ID. I know it's him. And I pick up and I said, hello. And he just says, is Mom there? I said, Preston, is that you? It's like, is Mom there? I was like, do you need me to come pick you up? No. Is Mom there? I said, no, she's not here. Click. And he hung up. He walked home. And so look at that lesson. My goal there in affecting change and lovingly training my son to be self-sufficient. That's the way I look at it. But what is the secret to change? Is it to make the alternatives incredibly embarrassing for your employees or for your child? It's in my buttons there. Is it about selecting just simply the right tools? That's going to affect change. Is it that I can employ just training and provide them with the resources and they'll do it themselves? Is that going to affect change? For a lot of organizations that have done these things, they have called out employees for doing the right and sometimes the wrong things. They've built out this technology. They've gone through the training. They've checked everything off the list to make change happen. And then people resort back to the old ways of doing things. And so the way that you affect change, that you impact your organization, is that you need to convince your employees, convince your team members to permanently alter their behavior. Of course, that's a difficult thing to do, but the benefits of getting change to happen within your organization are really powerful. When employees are able to adapt to those changes, whatever those changes are, they become more efficient. They become more effective in their roles and in their projects. They become more collaborative with each other. They look for opportunities to collaborate, and they then become more innovative. It's always interesting to look at, and I used to know there's actually a math equation on lost opportunity, and it's in a business realm. It's really easy to go in and measure the things that we do, and looking at the change from how we did it previously to something new. It's difficult to go in there and say, well, if we never take action, what is the opportunity cost that is lost from not taking action? And that's a lot of that happens around change. We never fully understand what could be there. So the problem, of course, is that change is incredibly difficult. I always say that organizations that are able to master change have a distinct competitive advantage over those that struggle with change. And that's whether it's rolling out a new IT system, changing a new business process, or evolving the culture of an organization. When organizations can get good at change, they will become dominant within their industry. All right, story number 2. Here's one that's a little embarrassing. It's again, every word is true. This comes from my young years as a young project manager working for a very large telecommunications company. For those that remember Pacific Bell, so I was with Pacific Bell back in the mid '90s. Spent several years there. As a technical project manager. So we owned a bunch of data warehouses. I was in charge of a number of the collaboration platforms and the analytics platforms, the tools that leverage the data within these platforms. So I had a project that was it was hired to manage a team from my previous company. So I worked for a consulting company called EDS out of Sacramento. I worked on the EDS Medi-Cal, so in the healthcare world, but I had close relationship with people in the EDS data centers and a couple other partner data centers in the Sacramento area. So I took this job back in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I was born and raised, and was an opportunity to move back closer to where I grew up. But they liked the fact that I had already relationships with these teams at the data warehouse, and so it just seemed like a really good fit. So I'm working on this massive project. This was a data center consolidation project. I owned the front end applications, but I was the on-point PM for our shared services organization. We were consolidating 3 warehouses down to 1 location. So we're actually shutting down our Hayward, California location, moving systems from our vendor from EDS in Sacramento, and we had some other systems moving up from Southern California, all into the central Northern California city of Fairfield, California, to this massive Pacific Bell data center. Anyway, with all of that, so huge project. It took almost a year and a half of planning for what essentially executed over a single weekend. It was a difficult weekend, and we had some trial runs and had some different issues, but throughout this project, it was my first large-scale, multi-organization, multi-location project management effort. I was in my mid-20s, and so it was just a huge opportunity. And I had some great relationships with each of the data centers and with all of the external vendors. We executed over that weekend. We hit our schedule. We were slightly under budget on the project, and it was a huge success. So the most of the project team after that weekend took a day or two off, and early that week, so I came into the office just to have a meeting with my direct manager. Sat down with a one-to-one and started talking about it. Said, well, here's the plan. Here's what's happening over the next 2 weeks. We've got a little road trip where we're visiting different locations and giving presentations as part of our project post-mortem. As these things went live, I said, but what's next? What do you have on the plate? And he paused and took off his glasses and kind of scooted his chair up to me and said, Christian, after this project is wrapped, you need to look for another job. And I was, sinking feeling, to say the least. I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? This was a huge success. He says, yes, this was a success. I think that you did a fantastic job with the project and with the external customers, and you burned every bridge with the internal team here. No one wants to work with you. As I looked at it from my perspective, as I had held people to their commitments. I drove towards the schedule. I got it done and under budget. And I was so focused on the external clients and ensuring that my own organization was about an 80-person shared services IT team, did what we said we were going to do and delivered the project. And yet I had burned every bridge. So what are the effects here on change? And so I learned some valuable lessons. And I'd like to say that I didn't repeat every mistake throughout my continued career, but I certainly did learn from it, didn't make any huge mistakes like I did in that role. But what I learned was that, without creating that lasting change, it wasn't enough just to force my peers to honor their commitments and deliver on that. It was how I approached that, how I worked with those team members. What I learned is that, people, if left to their own, they will follow the path of least resistance. People are like water running down a hill. You place a stone in front of them and they'll run around that stone. And so you need to think about, how am I redirecting? How do I get people to go the direction that I need, that we're doing this together? So that was the lesson for me, was how you reach your destination. It's just as important as the journey there. And with too many IT organizations, is that we focus too much on process and on the technology. It's the easiest thing to focus on. The technology. There's a new tool, there's new capabilities. We often forget about the people and how the three things, how people, process, and technology need to work together to achieve that goals, to achieve that change. Digital work, as I said, it's the three things. Technology is about can do. It's so exciting. It can fundamentally change our business activities. What we do, how we do that. There's a reason that I focus on collaboration and productivity. It's exciting. There's always change that's happening there, and it impacts the processes, the business activities. That's the second part of the impact. What happens? We might be doing something one way, and we may have the last day. That's the way we do that. technology can fundamentally
Okay,
change.
breaking up again. Let's hope it gets better. We're experiencing some light turbulence here. Can you try again?
Yeah.
Still breaking up.
Okay.
Keep talking, keep talking.
All right.
It's gonna get better.
So, yeah, how's that now?
Looks like we're past the turbulence zone.
Might
Go
be
ahead and continue.
sunspots or something happening. Yes.
Yes.
So processes, of course, are about the alignment of people and the technology. So as we have new technology, it impacts those processes. But the third and most important aspect of that change are the people. People can adapt and change, but we often pay the least attention to the impacts to process and technology. And one of the lessons that I learned from this experience and throughout my career is that when you can find a way to adapt the technology and process it doesn't mean that people can't change. It means that it takes time, and you have to be very aware of the cultural impacts, the culture of collaboration. I always like to share a story. I had a few years ago, handful of years ago, with a client that was based in Central California, and there was a family-run business. They made cheese, and they had a SharePoint environment, and they hired a new SharePoint admin, was so excited to deploy every bell and whistle. And we were, as a third party, we weren't consultants in there. They were buying our software to help administer SharePoint, provide governance on top of that. And in some of the planning sessions, we actually took this admin aside and said, I said, you're new with this client, and you helped bring us in, but the owners of the company brought us in. It doesn't seem like they need or are even able to leverage every single feature of the latest version of SharePoint. Like, we could see that they had wide eyes, that they were kind of scared with about some of the ideas that were thrown out by this admin who was so excited to get going. And we made recommendations of a very simplified approach to what this grand plan, and suggested to this admin that she follow a more granular, graduated approach to all of these new features, to start with the basics, provide on top of the new platform what they had in place, but to gradually add those other pieces, and that she would be much more successful. And that's the path that they followed. Even though it meant a smaller sale for us, because they didn't buy our product with all the bells and whistles, because they didn't need that either. So we tried to undersell them on what we could go and provide. But here's what I took away, and this is the kind of brings all these pieces together, the 4 ingredients to lasting change. And I stand by this. I've had this a version of this slide for many years, and I've lived and breathed this, and I believe in this. So the 4 ingredients are: first, having transparency, working out loud, making it crystal clear, like, hey, this is what I'm doing, why I'm doing that, and ask for feedback around that. It's no longer the idea that knowledge is power. Like, that is gone. That is from a past era. We need to be transparent. Power comes through sharing what we know when we know it, and having open dialogue around our plans and the state of our activities. Second is being consistent in our behaviors. Coming from that background as a business analyst and then project manager before I got into the consulting roles and technology evangelism and product management, as a project manager, I lived and breathed the methodology. I lived by the PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge. And so methodology was so critical to me. And the older that I got, the more experience that I got under the belt, I realized that it's great to have those guidelines. It's great to have a shared a methodology for how we will move things forward, but not we can't do those things and yet ignore the technology process and especially the people needs. But being consistent in our behavior helps people to be to understand, okay, this is how Christian runs these projects. Here's how I need to interact with him. And then they begin to trust as I bring them information. They know it's because, well, Christian's been thorough. He's gone through, he has the plans. We have these regular meetings where we discuss new requirements, changing requirements. And so you don't have people freaking out midweek when the planning session is every Monday, and yet and this has happened. And in the next story, I'll share some examples of that. But that consistent patterns of how we govern, the guidelines that we put in place, helps people to better adapt to the changes as they come around. The third piece is collaboration. I know we overuse that word. We use it for a lot of things, but again, it goes back kind of, as I said in the first one, transparency, but to have that open collaboration, we need to be collaborative. And so we have so many tools. We have so many methodologies. I've been for a long time a Kanban, a list guy. It's built in. It's just part of me with my ADHD and OCD and every other thing that the modern American has. But that collaborative spirit, the idea that here's everything that I'm working on, here's all the plans, and then constantly throwing it out there is like, what can we do different? What can we do better? Having that dialogue and providing different methods for people to communicate. It's not just enough. And I've, as a operations manager, as a project manager, I experienced this where I might have that weekly status call, that status meeting, everybody sitting around a table, and half the room will never say a word. 2 or 3 people will talk the entire time. And so sometimes it means being present enough to understand that somebody's not talking. They've rolled their eyes, they've whispered a side conversation with somebody else, is to go follow up and have a one-on-one and be like, you didn't share much. What are you thinking? I want to know what your thoughts are of what the plan is. And people will unload. They'll share. They're too nervous in front of a crowd of people, but one-on-one, they'll be able to share that out. To do polling, to do surveys, to all of these collaborative activities. Essentially, you are providing people multiple pathways to share, to make their voices heard, to make their opinions known. That's part of collaboration. It's not just about the technology, which enables a lot of that, but it's about the voice of the customer, the voice of the employee, and giving everybody a voice. And then the last one is that iteration. This idea that the waterfall method applies in so few cases. We need to iterate on the plan. So we may have the best plan, and I always refer to it. Even it's part of the vernacular now when I talk to my wife and my kids. Where they say, what are we doing today? It's like, well, the plan of record is this, and I like to think that when I say it that way, the plan of record means that that's the plan as of now. Does anybody have anything to add? Do we need to change? Do we need to iterate on that? Because it's rare that you'll be able to design something, build a plan, and then go with 10 different tasks. And then you go and as you're executing 1 through 10, they all happen as designed in that order as planned. It rarely happens that as you start moving forward, you learn a little bit more, you roll that feedback back into, you talk to people, what's happening? Is our understanding of what we need, has it changed in the last week? Having those conversations, if you're collaborating and you're being consistent about that collaboration and you're openly sharing all those things, then it gives you that opportunity to iterate. And while on paper, it looks like that iterative approach takes longer, anybody that spent any time as a business analyst or project manager that lived in that world understands that is a heck of a lot shorter of a timeline than it is to get 80%, 90% done and then find a mistake, finding a change, and then having to go back through that. It's more expensive, it's more time consuming, following that waterfall method, that approach. And so being iterative is so much more critical. So here's my third story. So this goes back to a little over 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. So a large software company based in Redmond, Washington, and my experience there. I can't say who it was, but yeah, that in this organization, I ran a shared services and operations team. We had tier 2 and tier 3 support people, so engineers and PMs and analysts for this very large organization, about 1,800 person organization. And so my little team of 10 to 12 people, we were very busy. We ran a lot of these essential systems for the operations of this broader organization, including providing all of the reporting up to our VP. And what I found is that my direct reports, my PMs especially, were really struggling with the prioritization as they were being pulled left and right with differing priorities from different directors and managers and even our VP. And we're getting frustrated. In fact, two of my key people were talking openly with me. I like to think that we had a good relationship, and so we could have these conversations during our one-on-ones where they were looking to leave, stay internal to Microsoft, but they were frustrated by the role and how we were treated as an organization. And so and we had built out a SharePoint environment for our reporting, for all of our project management, to share all of our project updates. And my team was in there on a daily basis, updating, providing these dashboards and reports and detail for this large organization. And yet nobody was going in there and consuming that information. So I went and I instituted a change. I didn't talk to anybody about it, not my director. I went and acquired a whiteboard, and we were up on the third floor of our building, and our entire team was right off the elevator. One major thoroughfare for a couple hundred people in our organization was walking past where my team sat with our cubes. And so I posted the whiteboard to the wall right there in front of my team. And I instituted a daily stand-up meeting. Said every morning, 9 a.m., mandatory. I had a couple people that had flex schedules, and I said, for the time being, we are freezing all flex schedules. You need to please make plans starting next week. You're here 5 days a week in the mornings for this meeting. So people were not happy on my team. They felt like, we're working hard and you're doing this negative thing. You're abusing us by forcing us to the schedule. I said, people, just have some faith. It's for a purpose. You'll see. And so we had this standing meeting. I'm sure some of you have done this before. We did something very simple on the whiteboard. We had a list of all of the current projects by order of priority of all the projects that have been agreed to and that had people working on them in order. And then we put an ETA for delivery of each of those projects. And then over on the right side, we had new requests lists, and I left that blank. So we used that first meeting, lasted about 30 minutes, to outline everything that we were working on, who was working on that, when we thought it was delivered in by order of priority. Now, what happened immediately after that meeting, it was exactly what I knew would happen, is that we had piqued the interest of a number of people. And so we walked away back to our offices, our cubes, and people from other parts of the organization walked up to read our whiteboard. And I immediately had one director walk into my office angry that his project had no one assigned to it and was lower down the list than he demanded. And so we walked over to the whiteboard and looked at, I said, the staff that we have, the people we have here, I said, we're working actively on these 5 projects. Your project is number 7. Here's number 6. This is a lower priority, but it was a direct request from our vice president, Anna. Is your project more important than that? Well, no. All right, let's move up. Here's this next project. This is what it is. This is who owns it. Here's the delivery. This is the resources. Is your project more important than this one? Well, no. So as we walked through that and explained that, and he agreed that it was where it was. He says, but I need it done sooner than that. I said, I understand that. If you could get me headcount, either as FTEs, as full-time employees, or as contractors, if you could help me, I'm happy to go with you to our VP or the owners of these other projects and negotiate to get them to change the priority. Do you want to do? No. Okay, that's what it is. Later in the day, again, this fully expected as part of the difficult process of change. This same director went to a couple of my direct reports and tried to have side conversations. Like, I understand that you're working this other project as a priority, but this one should be your main priority. So he tried to bully my direct reports into changing the priority and not telling me. So that didn't work. I had to course correct a couple of my people a couple of times over the next week or two to let them know. I said, you are not authorized to take on any new projects. We have a process in place where any new requests come in. If it's urgent, bring it to me. Let's have a discussion. Otherwise, bring it up at tomorrow's standing meeting. And so as we did this day after day, and the other thing that happened was suddenly there was a project that came in that took priority. So that became the number one and everything else slid down. Well, that same director was furious that his number 7 was now number 8. And then we had the same conversation about, this is what it is. This is why we did that. Here's what you can do to help us get things done faster. Otherwise, this is our reality. And this went on for a little over a month before what we started seeing. I'd say the third week into this process, people would come over and talk to my PMs or talk to one of my engineers, and they'd go up together and write things in the right column for the things to be discussed in the next meeting. They started to become familiar with and trusting in the process. So here's why, and so well, I guess let me wrap up the story. Is that we did that for about 6-7 weeks, and people then the responsible stakeholders started showing up at the governance meetings. They started reading all of the status reports. So all of that improved. I had my one-on-one with my director, and remember, everything was already in. All of this information was already out in SharePoint. We've been reporting on it. We've been sending out email statuses. Nobody was looking at any of that. And my director wanted to congratulate me for this success. Like, you've just turned everything around. This is fantastic. The one change I would make, it'd be great if you can move all of what you're doing on the whiteboard into SharePoint, where it's visible for everybody. And rather than pointing out that it was already there and we were already doing that, I said, that's a great idea. We'll get on that. And later that afternoon, we did nothing different because we were already doing it. I was able to report back to her, hey, we got everything moved in, so you can now go to this. And so we then started just sending out the updates via email on a daily basis, with just reminding people of the link to that they needed to bookmark to the SharePoint portal to get all that same information. And so it was about 6-7 weeks later, we stopped doing the morning standing meetings and moved everything back to virtual. So we were able to successfully make that change. Here's why it worked, because there were some very important things that happened there. Number one is that everything that we did was transparent. Couldn't be more transparent than that. We were writing on a whiteboard out in a hallway where everybody walked past. But all of our decisions, all of our priorities, it's like, in high school, when the teacher says, show your work. You can't just solve the math problem. You need to show me how you got to the solution. We made all of our activities transparent, and we talked about the process and why the process was important. We kept going. We're consistent. We understood that we were going to initially get flack, but as people started trusting in the process, then they relaxed and they started leveraging the process. They didn't freak out. They knew that, hey, we know that you're going to discuss this change. We could immediately discuss it, but it's okay. You guys can cover that in your next standing call. We also everybody had a voice. Everyone knew that they could come and write on the board. It was great to see that. They weren't pulling my people away from the tasks they were working on, multitasking them, forcing them to multitask. They were going and writing their new requests over there. And we actually had an intake form. We had a process. We had some workflows. And so we were able to, again, we didn't build anything new, but we were able to redirect people eventually to everything that was already automated out on our SharePoint site. We constantly revised the priorities because we realized the business needs were constantly evolving and changing. The needs of the understanding of the needs, especially from our vice president, would come in and ask for something urgently. And then her understanding of what was needed for the business over the next couple of days, she'd come back and say, you know what, this is a lower priority than I thought. So let's take it off of DEFCON 1, that top priority. Let's move it back down. We actually have a little more leniency in the delivery date for this. So those kinds of things happened every single day. And so we were able to more closely monitor and manage the immediate needs of the business by being iterative in our approach and by collaborating with people in the organization. And so this is the ultimate lesson, is that how much I was able to do and guide my team, and I was able to go and do this. And it's not like I just overnight thought of this. This was kind of a culmination of activities, but I thought about what is the culture of our organization? How am I going to make lasting change? I couldn't just do like with my son and put him in a really embarrassing situation so he never asked me to pick him up again. It's still a favorite family story though. And so this lasting impact as well. And I have to point out too, I asked my son, I said, and you're going to do things like this to your own kids. He's like, oh, of course, I'm looking forward to it. It's part of one of the benefits of being a parent. So yeah, that's great too. My kids have great senses of humor. But how much of the culture that I understood that I needed to have a method, have a strategy for this, be consistent, be transparent, be collaborative, all of those things I knew would affect the right kind of lasting change within the organization. It was very telling after I left the company that back in 2009 and went to a startup in the SharePoint space and went through multiple acquisitions and had that adventure, that I'm still on this adventure, that as I kept in touch with some of my former direct reports, they continued the processes that I had helped establish and built, the change that I had effected. And so that's always just a great, a reward for that, is to see that, people kind of pick up and run with the successes that you've had. So here's kind of where the rubber meets the road. Thinking about yourself, or as you're trying to identify people within your organization, I'm sure as everybody, whether you're thinking of yourself or somebody else, what it takes for somebody to be an effective change management, a digital workplace hero, a change management expert. They really do embody those things which I've talked about, the learnings that I had. Those people, they're very transparent about what they do and why they're doing that. They're very vocal about those things. Those are the kinds of people that you need to identify for these types of roles. The ones that will go out and, as the title says, champion these efforts to bring people together, to bridge the gaps of technology, process, and people. They're the people that are consistent in their behaviors. You can count on them. They're the people that they do what they say that they're going to do. And you might be that person. You can identify those people. They're very collaborative. So they fully embrace the technology, but more than that, they're reaching out. What are your thoughts on this? They're not just talking up a storm. They are reaching across the table and saying, what do you think? I've not heard anything from you during this entire meeting. Are we off on this? What would you do differently? It's great to have people that have that personality type that can that are constantly bringing people together. And then that last piece of being iterative, not being married to the plan that's in place today, knowing that external requirements are going to change, internal requirements are going to change. As we start to change our processes, as we adopt new technology, our understanding of what we need, of what's possible, will also evolve and change. So why would you stay with that same plan that you imagined, that you put together a year ago, 3 months ago, when you know that the fundamentals have changed? So you need to constantly be looking at reviewing. I'm a huge fan of, if you know, in the operations management world, W. Edwards Deming, and he was one of the individuals that was sent over after World War II, the U.S. over to Japan, and helped them with, like the just-in-time inventory and the process of continual improvement. In fact, it's not surprising that the largest industry-wide award for quality that you can get in Japan is given at the highest levels is the Deming Award. And he talked constantly about optimizing the system. It's a part of the way that we need to look at operations, certainly, but look at change. Change is going to happen whether we embrace it, if we attempt to work with it or not. So finding people who are constantly looking for the change and helping drive that change and make sure it's a healthy, holistic change, we need to do everything we can to support those individuals, find them, support them in their roles. You don't have to have an IT evangelist or digital workplace champion title to have that as part of your role, of what you're responsible for. You could be a PM, an analyst, a manager, you can be the CEO and be good at these things and affect change and part of that. And I think that the real lesson here is, for sustaining this and for making it easier to identify or let people self-identify themselves as change agents, is changing that culture. Creating a culture where, with change at its center, again, as I said early on, those organizations that are good at change, as good as they can be, that are trying to be experts at change, will have a huge advantage over the competition. And when you have that kind of culture, you're going to find people, you're going to start looking for in your hiring processes, you'll find people that are better able to do this. And my experience is that organizations that have a lot of employees at all levels that are good at change are the most effective, they're the best places to work, and they're the most successful and innovative ultimately. The end result is higher performance. You're going to get the accolades from the leadership team, but most importantly, we're going to spend less time managing the changes that are happening. And when you're good at change, you'll be able to spend more time focusing on and taking advantage of those improvements. And that's really the core. We do everything that we're doing with all this technology is not because we're trying to keep servers up and running. That may be your job, but ultimately, our job is to provide these tools and processes and happy people so that the work that our company does, we're better at it. We're more efficient, more effective, more successful. And the better you are at change, the more that you'll have those things. So that's it. Hopefully there's some things that you can take away from this. I'm always happy to field any questions if there are any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Oh, can I go? It's me. Hello, 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 hello.
I'm still here.
Okay, I'm
You're
here
echoing,
again.
Eva.
Maybe it's me. Hey, thank you so much, Christian. Yeah, so everybody feel free to unmute yourself and just ask questions or type them in the chat either way. Personally, I have to say that as an attendee, you get the feeling that you have like gathered all of the experience and knowledge you have gathered throughout the years, and you're serving it to us. So that was very valuable stuff, and I'm sure that others feel the same too. Those amazing stories were really epic there. My favorite one was maybe the honking of the horn. Myself,
Yeah.
as a father of two, I'm gonna use that one sooner or later when my kids
Yeah.
grow up a
Well,
little
see,
bit.
see, that's one of the lessons you have to learn is that you can threaten to do those kinds of things, especially with teenagers. But until you act on it and show them that you're willing to embarrass yourself at least once, that's all it takes is that one time. And then the threat of embarrassing them after that is enough.
That's
Again,
right.
not the best way to affect change, but it sure was a lot of fun.
I'm not sure about that. There comes a time when the dad stops being the superhero and the strongest guy in the world, but like an embarrassing person. It's inevitable anyway.
That's right.
All right, cool. So we're gonna start wrapping this up. We have another session starting in 9 minutes. I want to say one more time, thank you, Christian, for your amazing show here. Thank you for being here with us.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me.
No problem. So up next, in only 8 minutes, we are going to continue here in the experiences track. So we are gonna have Special Olympics Canada, I think. Yes, that is correct. So let me just confirm this so I'm not speaking any nonsense here. That's right. So we're gonna have a very special speaker or group of speakers, Special Olympics Canada, with partner Krios Park, explaining their digital journey. That is one of the sessions that I have personally been looking forward to most. Thank you, Annie, for confirming that. So grab a cup of coffee and see you here in a bit.